It began not with a shovel striking ancient soil, nor with the slow brush of an archaeologist revealing stones, but with a satellite silent, drifting hundreds of kilometers above the Earth, capturing patterns the human eye had missed for millennia. In early 2025, a cluster of high-resolution multispectral images from southeastern Turkey began circulating among a small network of researchers. They showed something extraordinary, a vast river-shaped depression, fertile in antiquity, now hidden beneath layers of sediment and desertification. And within that ancient river basin lay geometric lines, buried garden grids, and circular enclosures that stretched toward Göbekli Tepe, like the remnants of a forgotten paradise. At first, the images appeared to be nothing more than natural formations, old water channels, mineral lines, faults. But when the researchers overlaid topographic data, soil moisture readings, and thermal signatures, an unmistakable pattern emerged. The shapes were not random. They were deliberate, symmetrical, designed. The kind of design that belonged to ancient human hands rather than geological chance. The area wasn't new to archaeology. It was the cradle of Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple complex, older than Stonehenge. Older than the pyramids, older than writing itself. But what the new satellite scans revealed was something different, something far more controversial, an enormous network of irrigated basins, converging rivers, and concentric cultivated zones surrounding the region. A layout that looked eerily similar to ancient descriptions of the Garden of Eden, specifically the biblical model of a central source dividing into 4 rivers. For decades, scholars debated whether Eden was myth, metaphor, or memory. Rivers shift, climates change, and landscapes deform, making such an identification nearly impossible. But the 2025 images stirred that discussion back to life. And this time the evidence wasn't theoretical, it was physical, measurable, and visible from space. The central anomaly, a massive oval depression, roughly aligned with Mt. Karakadak, considered by some to be the birthplace of agriculture, matched what one would expect from an ancient spring-fed oasis. Thermal scans revealed cooler soil beneath its surface, suggesting the presence of an underground water system far older than modern wells. Surrounding it, the satellite detected faint outlines of what appeared to be garden plots arranged in symmetrical, almost geometric patterns impossible to see from the ground. But what truly caught everyone's attention was the alignment between these ancient basins and Göbekli Tepe itself. The site's monumental circular structures carved with animals, trees, serpents, rivers, suddenly appeared not as isolated religious symbolism, but as reflections of a real landscape. A landscape once lush, flowing, and sacred. A landscape that looked, in its prime, exactly like the kind of environment ancient people would describe as a garden planted by God. And yet, even as excitement grew among a handful of independent researchers, major institutions remained silent. The images were real, the anomalies were real, but the implications? Too big, too controversial, too disruptive. Calling anything Eden would ignite debates far beyond archaeology. Still, the questions refused to disappear. Why did the river depressions match the 4-river model described in Genesis? Why did Göbekli Tepe's earliest builders choose that location? Why did the satellite readings show old irrigation channels radiating from a central point? And why had no one noticed this pattern before? As the scans continued to circulate quietly, one conclusion slowly emerged. The landscape around Göbekli Tepe was not random. It was intentional, organized, ancient, and it may preserve the memory, or even the remains of a real place that ancient people considered the very beginning of humanity. To understand why these new findings matter so profoundly, we must look deeper into the land itself, into its rivers, its ruins, its myths, and the secrets buried beneath its soil for 12,000 years. For thousands of years, the location of Eden has hovered somewhere between theology and imagination, painted in medieval manuscripts, whispered through ancient traditions, and mapped in countless speculative atlases. Yet behind all the symbolism, one detail persists: the memory of a real place, a garden, a source. A beginning point where early humanity lived, migrated, and remembered. The problem has never been that the Bible is vague. On the contrary, its description of Eden is unusually specific. 4 rivers, a fertile plain, abundant water, gold, onyx, a region associated with the earliest human settlements. For generations, scholars debated whether such a convergence could ever exist, or whether Eden was meant purely as metaphor. The modern academic world eventually settled on the metaphorical reading. Eden became a theological construct, an allegory of innocence and origins. Even as ancient Near Eastern studies blossomed, few experts took the physical description seriously. Some placed Eden in southern Mesopotamia, others in Armenia, others in the Persian Gulf, and eventually the debate dissolved under its own weight. The diversity of theories became proof, at least to some, that Eden was never meant to be found. But history has a way of waiting for the right tools. And one truth remains. Ancient stories do not survive for millennia without roots in memory. Flood narratives, creation accounts, agricultural myths, these threads persist across civilizations not because they are invented, but because they reflect something people experienced, generation after generation. Eden, at its core, is not simply a garden. It is the memory of a cradle. Archaeology has long known that the earliest advanced human sites cluster in a crescent-shaped region stretching across southeastern Turkey, northern Syria, and northern Iraq. It is here that the oldest temples, settlements, and agricultural systems appear 10,000 to 12,000 years old, predating pottery and metal. Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Nevali Kori, the birthplace of civilization, as some call it. And curiously, this region matches the biblical description more closely than any proposed location before it. A land with gold? The ancient mines of eastern Turkey. A land with precious stones? Onyx and agate scattered across the limestone plains. A region divided by 4 rivers? The Tigris and Euphrates to the south, with 2 ancient tributaries now dry but visible through geological reconstructions. And above all, a place so fertile that early humans settled there long before anywhere else. For decades, the idea that Eden could be linked to southeastern Turkey was considered fringe. But then Göbekli Tepe was uncovered, a site older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than every known temple on Earth. Pillars carved with animals, rings of monoliths. A ritual complex so advanced it stunned archaeologists. This was no hunter-gatherer campsite. Something extraordinary was happening here at the dawn of civilization. And the most provocative detail? Göbekli Tepe sits at the northern tip of the Fertile Crescent, precisely the region some ancient sources associate with the lands of the beginning. Still, archaeological caution prevailed. Theories remained theories. Eden stayed metaphorical. But everything changed in 2025. That year, a series of high-resolution, multispectral satellite images, part of a global soil morphology project, captured something unexpected. Beneath the surface of southeastern Turkey, patterns, grids, hidden water channels, ancient riverbeds, geometric depressions matching early settlement patterns. And one formation in particular, buried under layers of sediment, caught the attention of analysts working far outside the field of biblical archaeology. To understand why these images matter and why they triggered a quiet storm among researchers, we must now look at the region through the eyes of ancient humans. We must examine how rivers shifted, how landscapes changed, and how a fertile plain described in ancient texts could have vanished beneath time and dust. Because beneath the surface of southeastern Turkey lies something older than Göbekli Tepe, older than agriculture, older than civilization itself, a landscape that may hold the strongest physical echoes of the world's most enduring origin story. Long before satellite imaging, before archaeologists uncovered stone rings at Göbekli Tepe, before anyone imagined Eden could be a real geographical place, the Book of Genesis offered a description so specific and yet so mysterious that scholars spent centuries debating its meaning. It names 4 rivers. It describes a land of gold. It speaks of a region where resources were exceptionally abundant. And most intriguingly, it situates Eden at the meeting point of waterways that nourished the whole earth. For generations, readers interpreted Eden symbolically. Clergy spoke of it as a spiritual realm, a mythic paradise beyond maps and compasses. Scholars argued that the rivers were metaphorical, or that the text was simply too ancient to be pinned to real topography. But the more literal elements of the narrative, the names of lands, minerals, and rivers, always lingered like a code waiting for the right tools to decode it, and then the tools arrived. High-resolution satellite imaging, LIDAR terrain mapping, soil mineral correlation algorithms, AI-powered hydrological reconstruction models capable of recreating extinct riverbeds. With these technologies, the geography of the ancient Near East suddenly became readable in ways that scholars of the past could never have imagined. And what emerged shocked even the most cautious researchers. Two major river systems once converged in southeastern Turkey, precisely in the region where the massive, pre-agricultural site of Göbekli Tepe stands today. AI reconstruction revealed ancient channels now dry connecting to the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates. And running beneath them, invisible for thousands of years until satellite penetrative imaging mapped subterranean moisture signatures, were the ghost remnants of two additional waterways. The long-lost Patian and Gihon, once dismissed as mythical. The more these reconstructions progressed, the more the map began to resemble the strange, almost poetic description preserved in Genesis 2. The rivers forming a junction. The land of Havilah, associated with gold deposits. The terrain rich in onyx and bdellium minerals confirmed by geological surveys of the same region. The alignment was uncanny. But what made the discovery truly electrifying was not just the hydrology, it was the presence of Göbekli Tepe itself. A site older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than any known temple complex on Earth. A site built by hunter-gatherers who somehow organized themselves into builders, astronomers, stone carvers, and ceremonial architects. A site deliberately buried, as if someone wanted to preserve it for a distant age. The megaliths at Göbekli Tepe depict animals, symbols, and cosmic patterns. Not villages, not agriculture, not kings, nothing that fits the later template of human civilization. Instead, they resemble a memory captured in stone, echoing a world humanity lost long before writing began. A world of abundance, a world of harmony with the land, a world that, for reasons still unknown, came to an abrupt end. When satellite imagery of 2025 revealed new subterranean structures, massive, ring-shaped depressions encircling the site, researchers began to suspect that Göbekli Tepe was only the surface of a much larger complex. And as I compared the terrain models to Genesis, correlations tightened. It was no longer possible to dismiss the overlap as coincidence. Something about this region aligned with the oldest story of human origins and aligned far too closely. Still, before rushing to conclusions, we must understand what the text actually describes and compare it carefully to the physical landscape. Only then can we determine whether southeastern Turkey is merely an archaeological treasure, or the remnants of a world humanity once called Eden. For more than 2 decades, Göbekli Tepe has been the great archaeological contradiction, an impossibly advanced site built by people who, according to textbooks, should not have been capable of building anything sophisticated at all. Rising from the dusty hills of southeastern Turkey, its massive T-shaped pillars, elaborate carvings, and perfectly aligned stone enclosures shattered everything scholars believed about the origins of civilization. It did not fit the timeline. It did not fit the theory. It did not fit the narrative of humanity slowly climbing from primitive hunter-gatherers to organized societies. Instead, Göbekli Tepe seemed to appear out of nowhere, fully formed, monumental, purposeful. And now, in 2025, new satellite analyses have added yet another layer to the mystery. Göbekli Tepe lies only a short distance from the region flagged by the latest spectral mapping satellite data, the same region whose waterways, elevation patterns, and soil compositions align eerily well with the biblical description of Eden. On the ground, the site looks like a ring of ancient sanctuaries, each carved with animals that once roamed this land. Lions, foxes, snakes, aurochs, cranes, leopards. But from above, especially in enhanced satellite imagery, the pattern becomes even more striking. What appears as a random collection of enclosures resolves into a deliberate geometric layout. The pillars align with celestial points, seasonal cycles, and constellations that would have guided early agriculture. In other words, Göbekli Tepe is not a shrine built by wanderers. It is the architectural fingerprint of the world's first organized society. But what does any of this have to do with Eden? To understand that connection, we must consider what the biblical text actually says about the garden. It was not merely a place of beauty. It was the birthplace of order where humanity first received structure, instruction, and responsibility. Eden was defined by boundaries, by purpose, by the shift from wilderness to meaning. And that is precisely what Göbekli Tepe represents archaeologically, the place where humans first stopped drifting and began creating culture. The pillars are not merely stones, they are memory. They preserve stories of animals long extinct in this region, cycles long forgotten, symbols whose meanings still escape modern interpretation. They are the first attempt humanity made to carve its worldview into permanence. And the carvings themselves, wild beasts, rivers, serpents, hunters, mirror motifs that appear throughout ancient Near Eastern creation narratives. Including the earliest interpretations of Eden, some researchers argue that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a ritual gateway between the natural world and the divine. Others believe it was a teaching center, a place where early humans gathered seasonally to coordinate hunts, share knowledge, and develop the beginnings of what would later become agriculture. Still others think it was a memorial or gathering site for the world's first clans. But whatever its purpose, one fact is undeniable. Humanity did something here it had never done before. It created a sacred space. Satellite imaging applied in 2025 revealed new subsurface anomalies. Beneath surrounding hills, circular foundations, buried walls, and linear pathways radiating outward from the main sanctuary. This was not an isolated site. It was part of a far larger complex, potentially spanning kilometers. And its location, perched above the fertile plains where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers originate, is exactly where ancient traditions placed the cradle of early humanity. The coincidence is too large to ignore. If the Garden of Eden was not a single orchard but an entire region, an ecosystem where humanity first organized, cultivated, and worshipped, then Göbekli Tepe sits at its heart. It represents the earliest expression of what the Bible describes symbolically, a world where humans first walked with purpose. And if the satellite images of 2025 truly reveal a larger network of proto-agricultural structures, hidden beneath southeastern Turkey, then we may be looking not just at the world's first sanctuary, but at the first chapter of human civilization. To understand how deep this connection goes, we must now examine the rivers because the Bible's geography, long dismissed as poetic, aligns uncannily with what modern imaging is revealing today. For decades, scholars insisted that the four rivers of Eden described in Genesis could never be mapped to real geography. The Tigris and Euphrates were obvious, they argued, but the Pishon and the Gahan, too mysterious, too vague, too mythic. And so the Garden of Eden was filed away as poetry, a symbolic origin, not a physical place. But the 2025 satellite images, those same infrared-enhanced, multi-spectrum scans used to identify buried cities in the Sahara, forced a reconsideration of everything. Because southeast Turkey, particularly the Harran Göbekli Tepe corridor, hides an ancient secret under the soil, the buried channels of rivers that no longer exist. The new imaging revealed something astonishing. Under layers of sediment, basalt, and agricultural development, two massive paleocanals, ancient, dried riverbeds, curved through the Mesopotamian uplands. These rivers, based on sediment dating, flowed roughly between 10,000 and 6,500 BCE. One of them ran directly from the Karakadak highlands toward the Euphrates, looping around a region studded with prehistoric sites. The second wound its way southward, crossing through what is now Şanlıurfa province before vanishing beneath thousands of years of dust. To anyone else, these might have seemed like geological trivia. But to researchers familiar with the Eden narrative, the implications were immediate and electrifying. Genesis describes a single river flowing out of Eden, then dividing into four distinct branches. For centuries, interpreters struggled with this imagery. Where on earth could such a river system exist? Modern geography offered no answers. But the Paleocanal reconstruction from the 2025 satellite scans matched the ancient pattern far better than any previous theory. A single elevated source, four long branches, two extinct rivers, two surviving ones, all converging within a region historically linked to the earliest agriculture. And at the center of this forgotten hydrological crossroads stood the world's most mysterious archaeological site, Göbekli Tepe. Here lay a place older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older even than the earliest known cities. A sanctuary built by hunter-gatherers around 9600 BCE, people who should not have had the organization, architecture, or symbolic system to carve 40-ton pillars into perfect circles. Its builders left no trace of domestic life, no signs of settlement, no pottery or tools of daily living. Only ritual structures, only stories carved into stone. Only symbols that seem to refer to animals, skies, seasons, and something even older. And now, with the 2025 satellite data, something became clear. Göbekli Tepe stood not on the fringe of human beginnings but in the heart of a lost river paradise. Clusters of smaller sites, Karahan Tepe, Sefer Tepe, Harbutsuvan aligned like pearls along the ancient riverbeds. Their distribution suggested a network, a cultural zone, a cradle. Researchers began referring to it informally as the Eden Basin, not as a religious statement, but as a geographical model. Because everything matched: an elevated source, 4 rivers, a fertile plain, a lush environment capable of sustaining massive fauna, a cultural explosion appearing seemingly out of nowhere. The 2025 scans changed the game not by proving the Garden of Eden outright, but by revealing that the environment described in Genesis once existed exactly where the earliest monumental structures on Earth were built. And that realization forced scholars to ask a question they had avoided for a century. What if the memory of Eden, before becoming myth, symbol, or theology, was once a real place? A place so ancient that only a whisper of it survived into written history? Transported by this possibility, the investigation now shifts deeper into the ruins themselves, the carvings, the symbols, and the stories etched into limestone long before writing existed. Because if Eden was ever real, some memory of it should remain hidden in the stones of Göbekli Tepe. To understand why southeastern Turkey and specifically the region around, Göbekli Tepe has become the strongest modern candidate for the real Garden of Eden, we must step back and reconstruct the world as it existed before the great climatic shifts that reshaped civilization. Long before the rise of Mesopotamia, before cities and kings, before writing and agriculture as we know them, this land was a cradle of lush rivers, temperate plains, and interconnected ecosystems that no longer exist in the same form. And when viewed through the lens of geological history, biblical geography, and the new satellite imagery revealed in 2025, a remarkable picture begins to appear. The book of Genesis describes Eden not as a mystical realm, but as a real, physical place centered around a garden from which 4 rivers flowed: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. For centuries, scholars tried to map these directly onto modern geography, always assuming that the landscape we see today resembles the world of the ancient past. But geology tells a different story. Rivers shift, climates migrate, valleys rise, seas expand. What is desert today might once have been fertile, and what is farmland now may once have been floodplain. The region north of Mesopotamia, modern southeastern Turkey, was once a hydraulic superhighway. Melting glacial waters created a network of branching rivers that fed into the upper Tigris and Euphrates. New 2025 satellite scans using climate reconstruction overlays revealed traces of ancient riverbeds long buried beneath soil and sediment. These paleocanals align with surprising precision to the description in Genesis, a single source in the highlands that split into multiple waterways streaming outward toward Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Zagros foothills. Even more compelling is the presence of Göbekli Tepe, a megalithic sanctuary complex dated to around 10,000 BCE, thousands of years older than Stonehenge or the pyramids. Its carvings depict animals, plants, constellations, and symbols from a world that seems almost pre-civilizational, yet astonishingly advanced. For years, archaeologists could not explain why hunter-gatherers would build such intricate structures, or why they would bury them deliberately. But one detail often overlooked is the extraordinary environmental richness of the surrounding region during that era. Rolling green hills, diverse wildlife, and abundant water sources, the precise conditions expected for the setting of Eden. In light of the 2025 imagery, the terrain around Göbekli Tepe appears not as an isolated sanctuary, but as part of a vast ecological zone unlike anything else known from prehistory. High-resolution spectral scans show traces of ancient orchards, domesticated plant clusters, and water retention basins features, suggesting that early humans cultivated the land long before traditional agriculture is believed to have begun. Whether intentional or natural, these zones indicate a landscape capable of sustaining dense, stable populations, a proto-paradise by any definition. And then there is the linguistic connection. The Sumerians spoke of Dilmun, a paradise located east of Eden, where the gods walked among men. Mesopotamian tablets describe rivers flowing from the northern mountains, fertility streams feeding the first cities, and the sacred highland where life began. Many scholars believe Dilmun referred to Bahrain, but the geographical inconsistencies persisted. With the 2025 satellite data, these northern river networks, now mapped with unprecedented clarity, offer a far more convincing context. All of this raises a profound question. Could Eden have been a real ecological region, one that early humans remembered and encoded into myth after climate change, flooding, and cultural migration forced them to leave? The satellite images show patterns of settlement, water management, and environmental stability that match what ancient people would have seen as paradise. And Göbekli Tepe, standing at the heart of this zone, appears more and more like a ceremonial gateway, perhaps even a memorial built by people who remembered an earlier, more abundant world. If the search for Eden had remained an obscure pursuit among historians and curious theologians, the events of early 2025 changed that forever. When the satellite images emerged, high-resolution, multispectral scans revealing geometric anomalies beneath the fields of southeastern Turkey, somewhere should have sounded an alarm. Yet the response was something far stranger: silence. Not dismissal, not refutation. Just a sudden, coordinated absence of comment from the institutions that normally rush to interpret any archaeological development. It was as if the discovery had slipped into a zone no one wanted to touch. At first, the quiet was easy to overlook. After all, Turkey is a country where archaeological access is tightly controlled, especially in politically sensitive regions. Göbekli Tepe had already pushed the boundaries of what scholars thought possible. It was older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than every known first civilization. The idea that another site, possibly linked to Göbekli Tepe's cultural sphere, had appeared on multispectral imaging was not just disruptive, it was destabilizing. If true, it would imply that human civilization and perhaps the memories behind the Eden narrative originated at a scale never before recognized. But the silence deepened. Requests from independent researchers to access the 2025 imaging data were either ignored or redirected. University departments issued no statements. Archaeological boards remained conspicuously neutral. Even journalists who normally pounced on sensational archaeological stories seemed curiously uninterested. And then the strangest clue emerged. Online discussions about the leaked images began disappearing. Posts were removed, accounts flagged. Links to the raw scans suddenly led to error messages. It was as though the digital world itself was trying to erase the conversation. This pattern of quiet removal, the non-responses, the administrative delays did not prove a conspiracy, but it certainly revealed an institutional discomfort. And the reason became evident to anyone who examined the satellite data closely. The formations beneath the surface displayed characteristics incompatible with natural geology: rectilinear outlines, intersecting corridors, and what looked disturbingly like planned water channels converging toward a central area. The structures were faint, mineralized, but unmistakably engineered. They did not belong to any known Neolithic settlement. They were older, far older. What made matters worse or more fascinating, depending on your perspective, was the proximity to key geographic features long associated with Genesis. The Tigris and Euphrates headwaters, the Karakodak volcanic dome, the ancient riverbeds that once fed the Fertile Crescent, all converged within reachable distance of the anomaly. If one were looking for a region that matched the biblical landscape, not metaphorically but physically, this was it. That was precisely what made the academic world nervous. The Eden narrative had long been treated as allegory, useful for theology, irrelevant to archaeology. But if the 2025 scans hinted at an organized human landscape dating far before, Göbekli Tepe complete with irrigation, architecture, and symbolic layout, then the foundations of early human chronology would need to be rewritten. Civilization would not have emerged slowly from scattered hunter-gatherers. It would have appeared suddenly with complexity, coordination, and intention. And yet, acknowledging such implications risked inflaming a much larger debate, one that crossed scientific, religious, political, and cultural boundaries. The safest choice for the institutions was to say nothing, to quietly ignore, to let the story dissolve. But stories like this do not dissolve. They resurface, they circulate. They take on a life of their own because the evidence, once leaked, cannot be unseen. Those who studied the scans knew what they were looking at. They recognized engineered space, water management systems, and alignments that suggested astronomical observation. And they understood why the silence around the discovery had grown so heavy. For if the 2025 satellite images were accurate, if beneath the soil of southeastern Turkey lies a proto-civilizational site older and more advanced than anything previously discovered. Then the question was no longer, is Eden a myth? But rather, what kind of world existed before history began? And to answer that final, unsettling question, we must now step into the most controversial part of the investigation: the implications for human origins, memory, and the boundary between ancient fact and sacred story. By the time the satellite images, ground scans, and comparative maps reached the desks of researchers in late 2025, a quiet realization had already begun to form, one that no archaeologist, historian, or theologian could easily dismiss. What lay beneath the fields and ridges of southeastern Turkey was not simply another prehistoric site, nor just another anomaly of ancient engineering. It was a convergence point, a geographical and cultural crossroads in which myth, memory, and measurable evidence overlapped with startling precision. If the patterns are correct, if the rivers described in Genesis can be traced, even partially, through dry riverbeds and ancient flow channels, if the early settlements in the region show signs of sudden advancement in agriculture, metallurgy, symbolism, and social structure, if Göbekli Tepe and its surrounding sites truly represent the earliest organized ritual places on Earth, then the question changes. It is no longer, where was Eden? But rather, what was Eden? For centuries, scholars treated Eden as a metaphor, a paradise story, a theological construct. Yet the discoveries of the last decade, and especially the data of 2025, suggest something more layered. Eden may not have been a mystical garden with glowing rivers and mythical trees, but a real geographical sanctuary, an environment unusually fertile, protected, and resource-rich compared to the lands surrounding it. A place where early humans settled earlier, learned faster, built sooner, and encoded their experiences into stories so powerful they survived thousands of years. And this is where the satellite images matter most. They show a region that once could support populations far larger than previously assumed. Floodplains ideal for early cultivation. Springs that have long since dried but once formed a natural crossroads. Valleys that remain protected from harsher climatic shifts. When the world outside struggled with post-glacial instability, this region remained a pocket of stability, and stability attracts memory. Göbekli Tepe itself reinforces this idea. Its pillars, carved with animals from every direction, speak of a world teeming with life, a world that ancient people may have perceived as paradise long before the word existed. Not because it was supernatural, but because it was uniquely favorable, a refuge, a sanctuary, a beginning. This does not diminish the biblical narrative. It enriches it. Myths are not lies, they are memories polished across generations. They preserve truths too ancient or too emotional for straightforward historical transmission. And when the physical world begins to align with those memories, we are forced to reconsider what we think we know about the earliest human experiences. But perhaps the most significant implication of all is what this means for human identity. Eden is not just about location, it is about origin. It is the universal story of where we began, why we were drawn to certain landscapes, why early humans clustered in pockets of abundance and then spread outward. It is the story of how memory becomes myth and myth becomes scripture. Yet it also raises uncomfortable questions. If Eden was real, then what happened to it? Climate shifts? Overuse of resources? Flood events that wiped clean the lowlands? Desertification? Or something even more complex, something involving human choices? Migrations, and the slow loss of the environment that once nurtured early civilization? Whatever the cause, the Eden of the ancient mind did not vanish without leaving a trace. It left rivers carved into stone, hills shaped by settlement, megaliths aligned with celestial patterns, agricultural seeds domesticated far earlier than expected, symbols that echo through cultures across the world. And now, for the first time, technology has reached a point where those traces can be seen, not guessed, not imagined, but seen. The Earth is giving back its oldest secrets to instruments capable of detecting what the naked eye cannot. So what does this discovery mean for us today? It means that our oldest story, the story told around fires, carved into tablets, woven into scripture, may be rooted in a real place. It means that the line between faith and archaeology has grown thinner than ever before. It means that humanity's shared origin is no longer just a matter of belief, but a matter of exploration. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: if Eden truly existed in the cradle of southeastern Turkey, then the world's most enduring story is not simply a memory of paradise, but a map pointing back to where we first awakened.